Hey there, everybody. It's Mike Yao with Savage Kingdoms role-playing game and Fire and the Head Productions. Thought I would do another video today. So this video is going to be about, I've been thinking about doing it for a month or so. This is going to be about some role-playing tips for player characters. So a couple people kind of brought this up recently, and a couple people even asked some deeper meanings, some deeper ways to get into their characters and to connect more with this setting as well. Um, Even if you're an incredible actor, you may not necessarily be a good tabletop role player. I've actually seen it happen. I think I play a lot with professional actors. I'm one as well myself, and I feel like in general the actors tend to be better role players in general, but that's not always necessarily the truth. You can be a never been on the stage or in front of a camera in your entire life and be an incredible role player. But there are very similar approaches and very different ones. So I thought I would share some of those. So I've done a couple of game mastery tips for game masters, storytelling tips, and all the stuff that you would do with storytelling, but also managing the game itself, when to use particular dice rolls, all that kind of stuff. There's far better videos on YouTube of people doing that stuff. But anyway, hopefully my contributions can add to that lore, as it were, to that zeitgeist. So this one is about, so since I've done the GM and DM side of stuff, I thought I would do the PC or player character side of stuff. So, all right, here we go. Let's just dive right into it, right? I have basically 7 major points. So number 1 is engagement. And these aren't any particular order, kind of are, but they kind of not. Anyway, number 1 is engagement. What that means, engaging with the setting, environment, non-player characters, and fellow player characters. So I'll unpack that a little bit. So to engage with the setting is to react to the setting. Remember, this is your character's world. This is where he or she was born or raised or has come into. Even if it's an adventure where you just recently arrive in a new kingdom or realm, perhaps even another dimension, if it's science fiction, that character still was born somewhere, right? He or she didn't just kind of come out of nowhere. Presumably, maybe so, maybe depending on the game setting. But 99.9% of the time, that person is already, just like in the real world, we engage with our environment, right? You kind of have to, either in a reactionary way or a proactive way, or a little bit of both, and vice versa. So connecting with the setting, and that, a lot of that, a fair amount of that is on the game master, but not all of it. So the game master needs to narrate about what your character sees or smells or touches or tastes or whatever. And also there should be some established lore, right? You should know, because your character, like I said, lives or was born in this area, would know something about it, right? And there are certain skills in various game settings, particularly Savage Kingdoms and Dungeons and Dragons, which are the ones I'm most familiar with, that have skills that even allow you to do that. But those skills are really just kind of buttons to the rest you have to kind of do yourself. For example, your character wants to know more about a particular piece of lore or part of maybe it's a history check if we're talking about Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, or if it's more of a religious slant, it would be a religion check, right? Or something more arcane, it might be an arcana check. Just to give some examples. In Savage Kingdoms 3rd edition, my game, it would be a lore check. So there's really just one lore skill, and then there's different specialties, such as arcana or religion or nobility or heraldry or even military or whatever. So anyway, it's really the same idea. The game system is allowing you a button, so to speak, to kind of push to connect with the dungeon master. This is probably why I love lore-based skills, are probably one of my favorites. And I think most world builders and game masters, hopefully often they're the same people, but not always, like them too, because they give us a chance to kind of, the character wants to know about this, and if they succeed, I get to tell them this cool stuff, right? And maybe there's levels. I usually do levels of success. If you roll low, but usually it has to be at least a 10 difficulty class or difficulty level, depending on the system. You might know a little bit. If you get a 15, you know, like a decent amount, and then a 20 or higher, maybe a 25, you know, like lots of obscure lore about this particular subject that you're asking about. So these type of skills kind of set it up with the game master. It's almost an invitation to know more stuff. Or it's a metagame thing. It's like you as the player know the answer, but you're allowing your character to know. That's another reason I like that skill. It really makes a cool little separation between what the player knows and what the character knows. I run a lot of kids games, and the kids are awesome. They're great and creative, but some of the particularly ones on the younger side have sometimes a problem with separating character knowledge and player knowledge because they'll study the books, and God bless them. I love it that they read, and they'll know all this stuff about a particular monster or god or something, and they'll sometimes try to use it in game. And I have like, all right, well, let's make a religion check or an arcana check or history or whatever to make sure your character knows what that is, and they're pretty good about once you kind of tell them they kind of get it, and yeah, but it's really kind of funny, actually. So connecting with the engagement, this is what we're still number one, engaging with the setting, environment, which I think I just kind of covered. So environment just kind of breaks down the setting in general. Setting is like the whole thing, right? So environment would be if the game master described that you're traveling through a forest. You could even ask him: is it a coniferous forest, or is it evergreen, or is it a mix? Is it temperate forest? And then he would say, oh yeah, it's temperate or whatever. In fact, most of the trees you notice tend to be oak trees, or tend to be. So you're inviting the game master to give you even more information, and it gives you a clear thing in your head. Uh, and then you can use those things, right? So it's just like I hate to use video games as an example because I'm not a huge video game player myself. I know, God forbid, I'm only half a nerd. Okay, probably three quarters. But they do a pretty good job of, well, that's actually a good and a bad thing, but engage, it's like, oh, I'm going to use the tree branch on the side because you can visually see it on the screen, right? Or I'm going to see if that rock does anything, if I search under it, or if I can throw it at something. But not everything does that, right? Because computer games, even though many of them are quite advanced nowadays, they're still not capable of simulating the entire world, right? You can't interact with the entire world. But pretty close to some of them. The cool thing about tabletop role-playing games, because it takes place predominantly in our minds, that you can interact with pretty much anything. So you could say, oh, you described a oak tree. I'm going to climb the tree and see if I can get a better vantage point, see if I can see the castle in the distance that we're looking for, or if there are any enemies approaching or wild animals because we need to go hunting or whatever. And you could get even more detailed. Are there any hollows in the tree where I can hide something? And the GM might give you this really cool detailed answer. So the problem here is, of course, you don't want to bog down an entire game session with all this minutiae, but a lot of players, surprisingly more than you would think, really like these details when it's kind of, kept tight, and you're not dwelling on this one little aspect for like 30 seconds or 30 minutes. 30 seconds would be awesome, or more, but 30 minutes. So engagement with the non-player characters of the world, NPCs. Um, so yeah, again, if the game master describes this bustling village, it just those words alone give you like an idea of like, oh, I could probably find a merchant or a cobbler or a tailor or a potter or whatever it is I'm looking for. Or if I'm a thief, I could pickpocket one of these people probably. Or maybe, and then you could ask the GM, there's bustling with what particular people in general? Are they well dressed? Are there city guards or whatever? And so again, you're inviting more of an answer. So it's kind of it's an improv technique, and I know a lot of game masters and role play gamers in general, including myself, talk a lot about improv. You're using a lot of improv techniques and methodologies when you're gaming, whether you realize it or not. If you're not trained in improv, you don't do acting and stuff, you may not know what some of the terms are, but you're probably actually doing a lot of it. You just don't know what it's called, right? Everybody knows about yes and. 10 years ago, nobody knew what it was unless you were like a professional improv person. That's a good example of just means you're adding to, you're agreeing with what was established and you're adding to it, and so that way you're building this cool little thing, right? So kind of what I've been describing is almost kind of a very much a yes and. Yes, there's trees, there's and you can find acorns if you want, or a hollow in the tree or whatever, or some writing on the tree that some wood elf left as some kind of warning or something. So yeah, so engaging in the non-player characters, and again, that gives the game master or the dungeon master a chance to respond with you, because we generally like, particularly myself, speaking mostly for myself, and I'm sure most others, that's what we're there for. It's a role-playing game, right? We like to role-play as well. So we are a player as well, even though we happen to be the game master or the dungeon master, we still are a player as in the fact that we're a participant. So we're happy to role-play a lot of these NPCs. Again, Don't bog it down though. So if you're trying to talk to every single NPC, the way I handle it, and I know this is not a game master video, this is a player character video, but just really quick as an aside. So I'll probably, if you go in to talk to a craftsman, a blacksmith, or a merchant, or a tradesman, or whatever, I'll role play and possibly probably too much at times. Several of those characters, and then if you keep going, I'll say I'll then do in it's a writing thing. When you read novels, you'll see that the author has several characters speak very in first person or third person, and then eventually the author will probably say, and then the next paragraph will probably say, and so they continue through the marketplace for the rest of the day, speaking to various craftsmen and tradesmen. So that's a little tip there. You can kind of bring the voice out of a couple of characters, and then you can kind of like, I wouldn't say hand wave it, because that seems like you're just kind of like whatever, but you're kind of summarizing it, I suppose. So yes, engagement with non-player characters makes your character pop as well. So whenever again, this is another little sort of acting thing on stage. The more your character is engaging with another character or another participant, in turn, you are more engaged, right? Because you were forced. Like it's like, hello, good day. Oh, I'm fine. How are you? Oh, I'm excellent. My name is Stephen. Oh, well, that's excellent. My name is Bobby. So that's silly, but you see what's happening. You're engaged. You're both engaging, and you're building onto the scene, right? So, and I know some players are shyer than others. We're all aware of that, and that's fine. Even the shyest players, I've seen it doesn't happen that much, honestly, but I've seen a couple of really shy players that kind of stay back that were some of the best role players because they were being very, very observant. And there's a thing in the acting community or acting industry that we call listening, right? It's actually probably the number one thing as an actor. A lot of people think it's delivering lines, it's talking, right? Or it's being demonstrative or loud or projecting on stage. And those are all awesome, but it's actually listening. And I would say in tabletop role playing, that's probably even more important, dare I say, than in like traditional performance art or whatever. So in other words, listening. So anyway, what I was getting at is these shy players were very good at listening because they weren't always jabbering, right? And they were taking in information. Um, and I remember one character in particular played a mute character, playing into his knowing that he was not very talkative and he was a little shy. So he made his character that way, which I thought was really cool. So he was kind of, again, engaging with the environment, connecting with it, using himself to kind of connect to the environment through his character. He made the character mute, by the way. So whenever he did speak, he always had to speak as a third person. So because the character he would say, it was a female character, I believe, and she gets up and strides towards the bar to ask the innkeeper something, or he liked to use the word stride a lot because she was kind of a proud warrior type. She would strides down the street towards the local temple to make a sacrifice or whatever. All right, so last bit of engagement is the big one, fellow player characters. This kind of weirdly enough gets kind of forgotten. So, I think a lot of people are pretty good at engaging with the setting and the environment within the setting and even the non-player characters, right? But sometimes, and this particularly is younger players, but adults sometimes as well, your fellow player characters, right? The people literally sitting at the table with you or on screen with you if it's online. Remember, their characters, if anything, you should be engaging even more with them than the NPCs, right? Because you've been traveling with them, presumably, for days, weeks, years, maybe. Or if you've just met them and you're making a fellowship or a adventuring company or party, then one would assume you might want to engage with those people that are going to be watching your back and keeping watches around the campfire at night in these dangerous territories, right? So don't forget to engage with your fellow. And this doesn't mean, although it can. This doesn't mean I'm talking to Jim over there because he's got pretzels and we're talking about football tomorrow. That's great, but if you're trying to go a little deeper in the role playing and storytelling, which I prefer, you're engaging with Jim, his character, right? Most of the time, you take a break and then you're like, "Hey, Jim, what's up? Why don't you give me some pretzels or whatever? Hey, I'd like another beer or whatever it is, or soft drink or whatever." But in general, when you're at the table in character, you are engaging with that player as his or her character and your character, and it's a magical thing. You can see those of you who are not, just a side note, those of you who are a little worried about character development and like how to develop your character, and I'm going to get to some more stuff. But within this engagement part of the video, you'll see as you talk more or even interact, even if you're the guy who's playing the mute character, whose character isn't going to talk to people, he or she is going to observe other characters, right? And even through the description of what the character's doing, he or she is going to use a lot of that. So the more you interact, the more you learn not only about the other character, but you learn more about your character. So that's another character building technique. Um, in fact, I think, honestly, some people come with these like 7-page detailed back histories, and those are great. And I'm going to get more on that in a second as well. But they're not really, and I've learned this as an actor too. So sometimes you do these like ridiculous backstories, and it's great and it's fun to write, and some of it sticks in your head, but a lot of it, in fact, most of it doesn't, unless you have a photographic memory or something, which is pretty rare. So the best way to do that is just to really come up with like 3 traits. I'm just throwing a number out there, but 3 is a good, it's a good mystical solid number about your character. And then as you play the character in the first or second three session, even later on, even like session 12, you're going to add little things from interacting with the environment or with the other characters, be they NPCs or PCs. So yeah, come up with those couple little okay, then my character's about this. This is his little bit of a couple backgrounds about his history, which develop those personality traits and wants and desires, and I'll get more into that in a second. But let it just kind of leave it at that, and as you interact with different things in the first few sessions of the campaign, you'll see that character develop more. You'll be like, oh man, that's going to be my thing now. That's really cool. Or some particular scene happened that was very resonant, and you're like, man, that really just kind of hit me. Not only maybe as me, the player, but particularly as the character. And now I'm going to carry that with me and kind of use that as a thing. So again, there's a caveat to that as well. So don't get too carried away with that, because occasionally we see that. Don't be like, don't like your character gets emotionally. There was a sad scene that happened, like maybe the character lost a beast companion or something like that, right? Or a friend. And that is very resonant, right? And it should be like a thing, and you should role play it. And I'll get to more of that in a second as well, I promise. But don't dwell on it for like the next 12 sessions, like, because then that becomes your only thing, and it gets almost kind of annoying, and then it becomes a joke, and then it becomes funny, and maybe it's good-natured funny, but still the fact that it lost the original impact of what happened, right? So just kind of, keep it, again, fine line, balance. All right, point number 2 is resonance. This is a term we use a lot in performing arts, in the sort of acting. Resonance, we like that. Writers use that a lot too. But what does it mean particularly? It's a big word, right? It means several things, and in fact, indeed, it does mean several things. But it means to resonate. Things that resonate with you emotionally is mostly what we're talking about when we say resonance. It can connect with you on a physical. Things can resonate physically as well through touch, particularly. But it's mostly emotion and spirit and psychology. So, what does that mean in tabletop role playing game? So, that means connect deeper to the setting for more emotional payoff. That's about all I wrote. So, I'll in my little notes here. So, I'll kind of break that down. Connect deeper. So, it's kind of similar to engagement, but I made it different because it's different enough. So, what that means is resonance means you're connecting on a more of emotional level. And that seems kind of weird because I think I was telling it to someone last night when we were playing. We're all sitting around a table, right? In real life, we're sitting around the table, and we got real lives and stuff going on, and we're throwing dice and eat puzzles or whatever. We got character sheets in front of us, pencils, dice, maybe some miniatures, whatever. That's the reality of what's happening, right? But to our characters, they're in this world, right? They're in this thing where demons and creatures may or may not exist, and magic might be scary, and it's rare, at least should be, in my opinion, to be more resonant, since we're on resonance. They're dealing with all this, right? So it's easy for us to go, yeah, he takes 15 points of damage, okay, whatever, and that's fine. But remember, think about what just happened. If you have 30 hit points or health, and you take 15 points of damage, that's half of it. So if this were in real life, I know that's deliberately a generality, hit points and health, and as it should be. But if that were real life, half of your health, I know it's kind of hard to quantify, but that's a pretty serious wound, one would assume. So you can kind of react to that on an emotional level instead of just saying, all right, I take 8 points of damage. that's just one example. Or you you encounter this terrible creature that Game Master does his or her best to describe how voluminous it is and how great and powerful as the shadow lingers forward, begins to encompass your very feelings. So, that's probably a little over the top. Uh, but the GM is probably maybe being a little tongue in cheek, obviously, but trying to create this scene. And reason he's doing that or she is trying to get what's the term, a rise out of that person, a reaction. So that's your key right there to kind of you can make your characters, and I see this too much in Dungeons and Dragons sometimes, not as much in Savage Kingdoms because it's a little grittier. But in SK in D&D 5 edition, which I love, but the characters tend to be a little on the powerful side at times. So they get a little cocky. So I rarely see like, oh, uh, someone kind of shrink away and kind of role play being sort of disturbed by this horrible creature that they meet or whatever's happening. They tend to be kind of cocky and, I've got this ability that does 3d6 damage or whatever. And that's all well and good. And you can do that, but do it from an emotional standpoint. And remember this creature in front of you, or this setting that you're in, this volcanic Mordor-like setting that you may be traveling through. It should be producing some emotional resonance, right? So, again, imagine you're that character in this environment, in this situation, and you'll find that emotional resonance. You don't have to be an actor to find that. It's all stuff that's in all people. That's where it's coming from. That's where we're drawing it from. So, yeah, that one's hard to describe. So hopefully you guys got something out of that. I think I confused myself actually a little bit. But anyway, so overall it means to connect deeper to the setting for more emotional payoff. And I would say connect deeper with the fellow NPCs and the fellow PCs like we established in the engagement portion of the video. So, and then you'll find that, and don't be afraid to be. I don't say you have to cry whenever you're carrying. You don't have to go. You can if you want. That's fine. But just don't be afraid to let it hit you a little emotional. Remember, it is a role playing game, right? But that doesn't really say enough. I would say if I invented Dungeons and Dragons in the '70s, I would probably call this hobby a storytelling game instead of a role playing game. Uh, no, that's a whole different video. Back in the '70s, it was really more about playing a role as a thief or a fighter or whatever, and it wasn't so much about resonant acting and that kind of stuff. But remember, it is a storytelling game, and in stories, there is emotions and resonance, right? So, all right, number three. Number three, initiation slash proactivity. I couldn't decide which one, so I just put a slash. Initiation, in other words, to take the initiative, not in the game mechanical sense, but in the real life sense, proactivity. So being proactive um, or initiate, be an initiate. Initial. Oh, there's a word in there somewhere. Meaning that be proactive with the characters and not always so reactive with your characters. Be proactive with your character and not always reactive. We see a lot. I see this a lot actually, and it's not always so horrible, but there's a lot of players will bring characters to the table, and they might even have like a goals written down or whatever, and but they don't really. They just kind of sit there and they're literally waiting for something to happen, and that puts a lot of pressure on the game master because you're not having a buy-in with the player, right? So the game master is like, well, great, I literally have to do everything because this player's not really proactively engaging stuff. So the way to be proactive is just take the initiative, being proactive. So in other words, instead of waiting for stuff to happen to you that the game master is going to describe, or maybe one of the other player characters sets up, look for it. So it doesn't mean like I run up to the innkeeper and I punch him in the face because I want something to happen. I guess you could do that. Hopefully you have a character reason for that. But that's a little silly, obviously. But do stuff. I'm walking down the city streets and see if I can find this legendary like hidden temple that I was told about. Or in order to know about that, maybe you have to make that history check or religion check that we talked about earlier. But just being proactive instead of, oh, I wish I had a better sword, and you're just sitting there. It's like, well, I don't know, maybe go find a swordsmith that could make you one. Ask rumors if there's a magical sword in some far ruined temple or castle somewhere that you may go questing for. Um, so yeah, in other words, if your character wants something, then be proactive about it, right? Now, it's fun to play kind of a laid back, lazy character on occasion, but again, go easy with that because that comes across again as being not engaging, and the game master, GM, we're people too, right? And we're participants in the game. We want to have fun as well. So if you're just kind of sitting there, you're making us do all this work. Now I'm a DM and GM that likes a pretty heavy workload. Like I'm used to handling 8, 10 players sometimes at one time, sometimes, and they're often their kids or online and stuff. I prefer to have 4 or 5 players or just 6, but I'm saying I'm capable of holding more because I've been doing this a while. But um, I would prefer, it's nice when somebody's helping you out. Some of the players are helping. And I'm not just saying mechanically, like, oh, I'll help you look this rule up in the player's handbook or whatever. That's great and all, but more like carrying the storytelling, helping carrying a storytelling load. Particularly if you're in a downtime, like you're after a major storyline or adventure, and um, the GM may not even sure where you're going next. He probably has several little potential plot rumors that you can grab a hold of, and nobody's really doing that, and everybody's just kind of sitting around, maybe doing downtime or whatever. Um, so if 1 or 2 of the players can come forward and be a little more proactive and say and actually do something on his character sheets, do something on the goals and motivations section of the character sheet, if there is one. If there's not one, make one. And like, you know what? I think it's time to go seek vengeance on that person that I know it's a stereotypical thing, killed one of my family members or whatever, wiped out my tribe. Maybe it's time I go find the wand of resurrection that my ancestors spoke about when I was training as an acolyte in this religious order, whatever. Maybe it's time I go do blah blah blah, or at least start on the path. And GMs love that. We're like, cool, especially if we're not quite sure where we really want the campaign to go. And I've been there. And you're really kind of hoping a PC wants to step forward. And I try my best to stay behind the curtain and not come sort of out of character, although I have a few times, particularly with younger players. We don't want to go, all right, guys, it literally it's time. You guys can do whatever, and I'll go with it. Or that rumor you just heard might be a cool thing to go do. I don't know. Uh, so I rarely will step forward to do that, but I have been known to do it on occasion just to get the game going, right? Because time is at a premium, especially as an adult. And if we got this 4 hour window, you don't want to just waste 45 minutes of it kind of slouching around, right? You want to be kind of proactive. So, all right. So taking the initiative, being proactive. That was number 3. Number 4, wants or needs. Big thing here. Big thing, but also little thing. Little thing because most people have them written down, but I don't see them often get sort of played in a resonant sort of way or an engaging way to kind of cover, or proactive way to cover the last 3 things we did. So, what does your character want? I know, and this is another sort of acting thing. What does your character want or need? And then separate the 2 as well. What's the difference between the want and the needs of the character? Does he truly need it? Does he or she just want it? Or does he or she truly need it? Or does he or she think they need it and it's really more just a want? Consequently, what does he or she like, dislike, fear, etc.? So, wants and needs. So, yeah, write some wants and needs down. And like I said, a lot of people write them down and just kind of forget them, or at least have them readily in your brain. And if you role play the character enough and you engage with the character, like I was saying earlier, this stuff will pop. I promise you, it will come in your character. If you start playing, it's like taking the character out for a test drive. If you start doing these things I've been talking about, these things will pop out, and you will almost automatically play them. And there will be moments, and as an actor in a tabletop role player game, it's happened to me many times, where you're just kind of like, that was really cool. How did I didn't even plan to do that. It just sort of organically happened. And it's really cool. That makes the character seem really real. And in a ways, in a sense of perception being truth, it is real. It is a real thing. You are being that character in that moment, right? So the way to do that is, like I said, all the stuff I've mentioned earlier, but this number 4 section, wants and needs. So make sure the character has wants and needs, and that you know the difference. And maybe they don't know the difference, but the player probably should know the difference, right? Um, Consequently, what does he or she like, dislike, fear, hate itself? So, because that will help with their wants and needs. So, if the character really likes something, chances are he wants something, or to deal or interact with whatever it is, or even needs it. Savage Kingdoms, my role-playing game, has a little bit harder form, like a game mechanic that's more attached to stuff like that. Like you can take the obsession weakness or the phobia weakness or addiction, and game mechanically it gives you bonus points, whatever. But the big thing is role-playing wise, it gives you some actual buttons to push, and it's a big reminder on the character sheet, like, oh yeah, I'm afraid of fire, or heights, or I'm obsessed with Queen, the beauty of Queen Elspeth, or whatever it is, or I'm driven by chivalry, or whatever it is. So if you have those things, whatever the game system is, and D&D Fifth Edition, it would be in your personality traits section, right? They would be in flaws. We'll get to flaws in a second, actually, but they would probably be in your ideals, probably in your bonds, and it might even be one of your personality traits. If you want or need something so much, that sometimes becomes a character trait with real life people as well as fantasy or science fiction characters. So determine what he or she wants, needs, likes, dislikes, and also don't forget fears. Going back to what I said earlier, a lot of times we see these kind of cocky characters, particularly in, say, D&D. Not to pick on D&D, I love D&D, because they're kind of powerful, and they're kind of like, blah, 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 yeah, I'll smack you with my +5 sword or whatever, or this incredible ability that I have. And not kind of respecting the environment and the monsters. I mean, you can be a Witcher-type slayer, but even if you see the Witcher, even the Witcher despises these monstrosities, but he kind of respects them, particularly the powerful one, because he's not an idiot. You have to respect your enemy, or else you're going to get caught. You're going to get blindsided and get smacked. So just kind of keep that in mind. So what I'm getting at is make sure you have a fear or two. So remember, every hero has a flaw, and typically that can be a fear. And those are fun. They're not like, oh, my character's weaker because I'm afraid. It's like, no, your character actually is stronger in the traditional literary sense of the term character. The character is stronger actually that way, more realistic. And I know, and I will use the term realistic. A lot of people are like, oh, it's fantasy. I'm not going to use realistic. I will totally use that term because within the fiction, that's the reality that we're talking about, right? So wants and needs. Number 5, flaws and quirks. Flaws/quirks. All right, so and then I put all heroes have a flaw or two, which I already mentioned, but I'll say it again because I wrote it down. All heroes have a flaw or two. Realistic flaws, again, I will use the term realistic, I don't care, and not annoying ones. So I'll get to that in a second. So remember to have in your D&D 5th edition character sheet, you literally have a place for flaws. I think usually there's one if you're like rolling it up from the background, but you can have one or two, maybe three even. And then I made them realistic because occasionally I see, and I love people role-playing flaws, but some of them are kind of not realistic in the sense to the character of the setting. It's like, why are you an adventurer if you are afraid of nighttime or afraid of food or whatever it is? So make sure they're kind of like, they're not silly and they're kind of realistic. They can be a little silly if they're resonant and realistic to the setting, but not too much because that will just become a laughing point. And it's okay, obviously we're during game sessions, we have a good time, we laugh, that's why we play, right? But if it becomes too silly, it becomes distractive, and it just becomes like you get to the point like, why are we even playing this game? Why don't we just sit around and tell jokes or whatever? So have a flaw or two, realistic flaws, not annoying ones. To the last point, annoying ones. If don't, it's kind of what I was just saying, but I'll just add a little more to it. And again, not to pick on the kid characters, I love them to death, and they're young and they're learning, but sometimes they'll have this flaw, which is great, but they just like over and over just hitting the same button. Oh, I'm doing the same thing like 12 times in a session, and that's bless their hearts. It's great after a time or two or three, but then it's like, oh, give me inspiration because I keep playing my flaw. It's like you're just no, you're not doing it organically. You're just hitting the button. You're hitting the spam button. So make sure they're not annoying, that you're in. It's not the forefront of the character. So yeah, all right. I think that one's pretty obvious. Number 6, backstory/adventure. What did that mean? Oh yeah, backstory and how it connects to being an adventurer. All right, so I kind of see this a little bit too. Remember, you're an adventurer, right? Particularly in D&D 5th edition, the character classes are very adventure driven. And Savage Kingdoms, even though it's called Savage Kingdoms, which kind of lets one believe it's very savage and barbaric, and that's partly true. But I did design a system where you literally, because people have told me that they're like, you can literally play an old man who likes to collect, like he's a merchant or something, or a peddler in the street. You can literally build that character. I've seen characters, people build 10, 11-year-old characters. That was the farm boy going on his first adventure, and he's kind of like wide-eyed at what the greater world and all that stuff. And you can do that in D&D as well, but it's more set up for, because if you go back to early Dungeons and Dragons, it was the guy going into the crypt or the dungeon to find the treasure, and then if you to expand it out a little bit further to probably help feed his family. A lot of these adventurers weren't really professional. They were like the farm guy who becomes a fighter because he has a sword and becomes okay with it or whatever, or becomes the person that becomes a thief or a cleric. Um, so if you look back in early D&D, these that's why it was more deadly. They were more like fairly normal people. They weren't superheroes really, particularly. They might eventually at higher levels, of course, but so yeah. So make what I'm getting at is create an adventure, and the reason I'm saying this is sometimes we game masters and dungeon masters will see character backgrounds or character histories that almost write themselves out of being an adventurer. You read it and you're like, and now I'm maimed and I'm blind and I'm afraid of fire and the night. And like you literally wrote yourself out of being an adventurer. Why are you playing this character? Unless the game master agrees to play a more grounded or campaign with all these flawed characters. That could be kind of fun actually. But remember, don't write yourself out of it. The second thing I mean by writing yourself out of the campaign or out of the adventure or out of the story is your backstory. I know a lot of people hit on the backstory thing. To me, a perfect backstory is probably 2 or 3 paragraphs. And I don't mean like giant chunks. I mean actual, like, grammatically correct paragraphs. Uh, Going back to an earlier point, just enough to kind of know what's going on. And also, it allows you as the player to build on it more. So sometimes people will turn these characters like 12 pages and they're great. I'm like, man, this person should be a fiction writer, should be a fantasy novelist. But they're not being a tabletop role player because they're writing this entire story, and then they're starting a first level character, and yet they've done all these major things in their background. It's like, oh, and he killed King so and so and inherited his crown, and he left the realm because people were hunting for him. He sold the crown for thousands of gold pieces, and well, why are you a first level character with 10 gold? Like, what happened? I mean, I guess you could do that if you put in the history, like how he lost all the money and all the knowledge that he would have gained past first level, one would assume, right? Or first advancement. So, again, don't write yourself out of the adventure. And another thing to that, sometimes you'll see, I think I may have just hit upon it, but I'll bring it out again. People writing stuff that keeps them from being an adventurer. Or they'll write, my character, it doesn't like to get along with all these different types of races or cultures or professions or whatever. And it's like, well, now you closed it off for your adventuring companions, and now you're a solo character. And maybe some players want to do that, yes, because I want to have the session entirely by myself. But I will do what I told people before. If they split off from the party, which I love on occasion, particularly in towns and urban settings, and even in the wilderness, because sometimes it makes tactical sense and realistic sense and maybe resonant role playing sense to split off. But I always tell people, know that if there's 5 players at the table, and you split off, you're going to get 20% of the session in general, because that's 1/5, right? So I have to remind the kid players that pretty often, and usually they sort of come back to the group. But again, it's cool to split up on occasion. Just as an aside, the reason I mention that is because some people in their character history will literally write things that makes them solo or makes them lone. So do some of that. Obviously, we want to see that you're suspicious of a certain culture or a certain religion or what a religious sect or whatever. That's cool. That's resonance. That's engagement, like I talked about earlier. But don't do it so much to where you're closed off, right? Again, just hit enough kind of bullet points in your background and your character traits and flaws, and then expand upon that as the game sessions continue. So there we go. Oh wait, thought I was done. Last one. 39 minutes. I better get going. Number 7. I saved this one for last. This is character voices and speech patterns. Because I know a lot of people, particularly newer actors or people who just are not actors, but they hear about acting. One of the first things they talk about, other than line memorization, I always get asked that, is character voices and that sort of thing. And that's great. That's definitely a thing. But I put that as number 7 because I kind of feel like that's icing on the cake. The cake is all the stuff that I described earlier. That's the main stuff. So character voices and accents and dialects and speech patterns, those are important in my opinion, but they're number 7. All that other stuff is far more important. The one thing I do like about the character accents, well, I like doing them, of course, myself. So they're fun to do, actually. But also, they have a game mechanical thing. So whenever a player at the table is doing a character voice, you can tell he's talking in character, his or her, or he or her. If they don't do the character voice, sometimes you're kind of like, are you asking that? Because I've asked several times, are you asking me as a game master, or are you asking the NPC you were talking to? So if you do a character voice, you're rarely, if ever, confused about in character and out of character. So, which is awesome. So if you can do character voices and dialects, and I did a whole video about how to do that, and remember, it's not always about a dialect it can be a speech pattern, like William Shatner. Maybe your character talks like this. To that point, though, don't overdo it because then it becomes an annoyance and then it becomes kind of silly. So if you're doing the Shatner kind of thing, make sure it's not overdone all the way, and give it a reason for that. Another little acting thing. Why is the character? Why does the character talk that way? Does the character lose his train of thought, or is the character trying to articulate something and is choosing the words very carefully? So yeah, so if you do a voice pattern, think about maybe why the character speaks that way, or if you want to do voices and dialects. But again, that's a whole different video, and I've talked long enough. So that was number 7. So to go through the list really quick, number 1 was engagement. Number 2 is resonance. Number 3 is initiation / proactivity. Number 5 is flaws, quirks for your character. Number 6 is backstory and why are you an adventurer and make yourself an adventurer. And number 7 is character voices and speech patterns, which is just icing on the cake, and all the other stuff before was the cake. So thanks for paying attention, guys. A couple of you requested this. Hopefully this was helpful. I think it might be helpful to game masters as well, and even the experienced role players and actors. I mean, we forget. I was talking about this the other day. I'm like, I've been doing this a while, but there's still stuff. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm totally not listening there. I should be listening more there, or I should have been more proactive here, or something like that. So, anyway, thanks for paying attention. Hope you enjoyed this video. Leave me a comment and definitely like and subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys again soon.